Hey, you are blah, 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 blah. Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Andy,
And I'm your co-host, Josh.
and today we are joined by Sam Mason Bell, the writer and director of Home is Where I Lay. Welcome,
Hello.
Sam.
How you doing? You good?
Yeah, how are you doing this morning? I guess it's evening for you over there.
Yeah, it's like 5 o'clock. I'm doing good. It's
Well, Sam is the also the writer and director of Acting, which was our opening feature last year. And he is the only repeat voice actor, director, any talent from last year. So, um, welcome back to Horrific Hope.
that's pretty cool. Thank you very much for that.
Wait, can I clarify just because I wasn't around for Horrific Hope last year? Did you say you acted in something or you had another film that you also made last year? Or was it as a role?
My other film's called Acting.
Ah,
That
there
was
it is. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and so acting, also the another repeat actress, Annabelle Annabella Rich, who we had on the show a couple months ago to talk about When a Stranger Calls. If you guys haven't listened to that episode, we'll provide it in the link below. Um, but this reunites you guys once again, and you guys just seem to have like a really solid working relationship because she's done a couple of your pictures at this point.
Yeah, I'm very lucky with Bella. She's a good friend, and we tend to work together on the concepts we're doing. So there's a lot of constructive feedback from her in what we're doing with the characters and where the stories go. So yeah, we just had that nice closeness to be able to keep working in that way.
So our schedules couldn't line up last year to bring you on to talk about acting. Um, but acting and home kind of have very similar vibes to them. To where we essentially follow Annabelle pretty much the entire film. And is this like I'm just out of curiosity, like is this another like leftover COVID project that you guys worked on?
Acting wasn't actually a COVID project. We
Oh,
started shooting it in January 2020. So like it wrapped up in COVID, but we actually shot it just beforehand. I'm a big fan of chamber pieces because you can be very character focused, and I wanted something that was very character focused and very minimal. I've done some other films that had more casts recently, just before that. And I just wanted to do something that I could just go, okay, this is about you and a couple of central other characters. With Home is Where I Lay, that was a COVID project because Bella happened to, due to certain life situations, she got herself a location that was perfect. And she'd been having these weird, nightmarish fever dreams from COVID about seeing her own death. And fortunately, that usually means that there's probably a script shortly afterwards. So we kind of like sat down, built it more as a feature film. And me and Jackson Batchelor, who's in the film and one of the co-writers, we wanted to inject more of the religious, misogynistic kind of aspect into it, and we did some research on some lovely bits of the Bible that talk about misogyny nonstop. So we kind of just explored that and just thought that would be an interesting element to bring into the character. So we weren't just repeating another Bella in trauma role; that there was another element that we were exploring at the same time.
Yeah, I was actually curious about the religious aspect. If any of you guys grew up with that, like in your life at all, or if it was just from research, because it used to be such a prevalent part in horror, especially in the 70s and 80s. It was almost you always had to have a religious aspect to explain the evil, and we've definitely kind of shied away from that lately. So yeah, I was curious about that, and also just if there were any other films you kind of had in mind while creating this one, because you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I got so many like Rosemary's Babies vibes and things like that. So I was curious, kind of your inspirations.
Yeah, as far as religion's concerned, I know that Bella and Jackson both come from religious backgrounds. And one of them's a bit more chilled and the other one isn't. I won't say too much of what, that's their business. But they had an understanding of that very restrictive, repressive sort of attitude. I love like paranoid little psychodramas, like Repulsion, Polanski's Repulsion. So I wanted to replicate those kind of things and that kind of vibe. But also, there's an element of I wanted to have an element of The Shining in regards to, is this
hmm.
her own psychosis or is it this hereditary evil that's within the property itself. So it's kind of fun to like explore both sides of that. And yeah, 70s horror was more of a direct influence where you don't necessarily know, is this a psychosis thing or is this what's actually happening around them?
So one of the things that's really interesting for me as a viewer for this one and as the programmer of Horrific Hope, we were lucky this year to talk about to dedicate an entire block of both your feature and a couple shorts, Use Your Intuition, the Christening and La Nueva, the newcomer. And all of these films dealt with religious trauma in some capacity, so much so that the block is actually called Religious Trauma, which you guys can catch at 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, April 15th. But one of the things that I really connected with is there almost kind of seems to be this like personal edge to it, and like knowing that basically everyone that's in front of the camera and yourself served as a writer to a degree. Like how much of this would you say is kind of like actually taken from like personal experiences and maybe past stuff that you guys have done with the church?
It's an interesting one. Because we work mostly with improvisation, acting's the same kind of case. There's like bullet point stories, and then of course the actor takes it further from a discussion with myself. But yeah, they obviously take from what they know. So I know that Jackson, for example, although he comes from a more chilled side from Christianity, he's certainly seen the other side of Christianity. So he's seen the crazy evangelicals and all those nutcases. And the thing is, like personally, I've got a real interest in corruption. And I like to look at religion, and I've looked at a lot of different cases, and there's always the same elements of control and exploitative abuse, of gaslighting someone to believe in certain things because of God's will, and it becomes an excuse for that control play. Um, and again, when we look at elements of any hierarchical sort of situation, you got that abuse element. So to put it into a situation with a relationship as well, we really wanted to make clear that there's something you should be worried about with Jackson's character, because yes, he's nice and everything, but he's built this perfect world around her immediately without her real consent. It's more just being forced upon her. And I think religion creates those kind of boundaries in a similar way where they're like set in stone. This is going to make your life better, and there is no real choice. If you're following that path, you have to follow certain things. So it's not so much my personal experience. I'd say from just looking at the idea of that hierarchy within religion, so more like like research than personal problems with Christianity. Like I remember I went to Christian school and everything. It was a bit odd because you get little subtle things get brought in that you're like, oh, that doesn't feel like a normal thing to have to do, like visiting the church once a week and stuff, and doing art pieces on the church. And you're like, the church comes up a lot, seeing as we're only 15 minutes down the road. So I couldn't say directly me personally,
Sure.
but I know that for them on a performance sense, they definitely drew from their own backgrounds into it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it was a smart call too for me as a viewer to kind of take these big kind of not societal issues, but kind of talking about the church in a very big way, but then bringing it down to just the emotional level between two people. It's a way you can kind of make it so you made it so relatable, but without kind of going in this grand scale. I think that was a really good move and kind of what brought me into watching it.
I think that's the beauty of a chamber piece. A chamber piece allows you to have those bigger conversations, but you're they're more almost, I'm not gonna say allegorical because it's not so much in this film, but they become like archetypes of what those discussions are. But you're only in the confines of their emotions as opposed to actually seeing the real world out there and all of the other influences. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to play with chamber piece, especially in horror. Horror in particular is a great conversation to talk about the real world. So to do it in a confined characters is just a bit more interesting for me.
That's one of the things that I'm definitely passionate about when it comes to this genre is like that horror seems to be the most open out of every genre, whether you talk about comedy, drama, etc. And for me, like this and like the films surrounding home is definitely probably the most like personal that I feel in our lineup because I'm still a practicing Christian, but I've gone through a ton of um, you know, backlash in the church because of the tattoos that I have, um, music that I listen to, the movies I watch, the films we cover on here. And one of the things that I think that is really important to understand about Holmes' narrative and how it's set up is that like there needs to be some accountability put into place for people in power. And it's not just people in religion. I think right now in the US, like we're seeing it right now with the possibility of this TikTok ban and the Restriction Act that is going through. I know that Canada just had a bill passed that is also very similar. But you know, when for the people that are in powers positions of authority, like there needs to be some sense of accountability there, whether it's from people that are in uh, other positions of power around them or positions over them.
Yeah, man. I mean, like if you look at UK politics, accountability is just not something that is ever in discussion. So I don't know if you saw about our previous prime minister, the last two, Boris Johnson, and his the Partygate thing, where he just won't admit that like if he did wrong and he should lose his period. There's still an excuse. There's still a reason. There's always something. And you're like, this was during a time when no one, these were the rules, and he ignored them. It's just this constant repetition of accountability when it comes to those who are supposed to be, supporting and helping people. It's all ignored because the control and the power gets too much and they just want to dictate. And I feel like a lot of the world is going through much a slow dictatorship of the more right-wing extremist sort of repressive attitude. And again, that's why with Home is Where I Lay, it's always interesting to discuss repression in its different elements. Repression doesn't always have to be as aggressive as the crazy right wingers. It can be in subtle little things. And once again, religion brings in a lot of repression because it doesn't want to do the full picture. It doesn't want to show you the full spectrum of everything because then you start questioning perhaps some of the stuff you've learned. And I think government and religion work in the same way. They don't want you to question shit. They don't want you to question anything.
Yeah, I've definitely been in positions where like I would be lying like if I didn't like acknowledge that like I've gone through periods of like questioning my own faith and like questioning the very things that like I believed, and I've definitely again gotten backlash from that because even when like you tell people that I have depression, you're met with, oh, well, you just don't have enough faith. And that's not exactly how it works at all. And that's that's kind of where I've also experienced the questioning aspect as well. And think that for Annabella's character in this movie is that that's definitely something that she kind of has to go exploring, is because like by the end of the second act, start of the third act, we kind of start to see that like she's really going through that questioning process. And I think it's really made effective, um, probably by the dinner scene between her and Jackson towards the very end, where he's talking about bringing her onto like a trip, and he says something to the extent of well, we'll have to hide you because no other wives are coming, essentially.
Mm. That's the thing, is it's showing that there is clearly a lot of darkness behind whatever version of Christianity they believe in. And I think that's one of the things we don't specifically say, but it's clearly not the like Anglo-Christian Christianity. There's this weird bizarre thing with religion, with sects, like when you've got one Christianity who's like, you know what, I'm going to pick up on these particular elements and we're going to focus just on that, like the snake people. Or the Mormons. The Mormons have multiple different versions of Mormons. And unfortunately, when you go into sects, they tend to be darker and more manipulative from what I've seen. And I think that idea of that real repressive thing that of a woman being on essentially men drinking holiday, there's still an element of misogyny there that plays more than just the standard Christian questions there. His whole thing of going away is he goes away and just gets drunk the whole time. And obviously they don't want the women there because they want to just do what they want. And it comes down to all those sort of the housewife and the workman, like when you think of the 60s sort of dynamic of the man will go away and do whatever he wants because he's bringing the money in. He's doing a similar thing, but it's tied into his faith. We always kind of imagine that he's doing, you know, religious speeches across these places, and he's clearly come from some sort of like money, or at least it's hereditary, the home and all those sort of elements. So I think I rambled a little bit there, but
No, not at all. I mean, it's crazy just how like I agree with you when you say like when you break it down to sects, that's when it like when religion can get possibly a little bit dicey when you're really going into those little avenues of it. So yeah, I was just really kind of taken aback by all that. And it's also kind of just interesting, you know, the film is about such a repressed couple, and then not in a gratuitous way, but there is a lot of nudity in the film as well. So it felt like a real like kind of juxtaposition to me of their one life and then the kind of more surreal aspects and what she's seeing in her head. Yeah, that
I
was
think
really interesting.
nudity in horror is an interesting one because nudity could be used in like two different ways. You have nudity for vulnerability, and then nudity for shockingness, but like in a scared sense. So something like when she sees herself covered in blood and she's just wondering, she's not seeing a vulnerable version of herself. She's seeing a terrifying version of herself. And I think we just wanted the nudity to be like, if it's there, it's there. This is not a sexualized element whatsoever. This
Yeah.
was that in the sense of the bath, it's the vulnerability. In that other sense, it's not that. It was just the best kind of representation of just how violent this could get. And of course, we wanted to, like, in Bella's mind, she wanted to show multiple different versions of herself being in the situation where she could be, you know, killed. That's what she saw in her dreams, and she wanted to play those out. They were all her ideas of the different versions of seeing her own death, which, you know, says a lot about Bella. But it was fun to play with the nudity in that respect. Like, I didn't want to sexualize any single element, even when they're supposed to have a bit more of a romantic, kinky night and they're supposed to have the phone chat. It's probably not going to be anything that heavy because they're probably going to be people that have sex to have children, as opposed to feel the pleasure. And I just thought it was quite nice to give that, to take away all of that. There's nothing titillating about any of the nudity in the film, or at least that's not the intention.
No, I agree. It was not titillating in any way.
No. I think it's really interesting too, like hearing you talk about like the different varieties of like nudity and horror. Bringing it back to the relationship between religion and sex. At least in my experience, sex always seems like a taboo topic. It's like we don't talk about it. So you have, like it said, the characters in the film would essentially just be doing it for simply for procreation, not necessarily pleasure. And that's one of the things that it's like really kind of like messed me up in terms of like having to like discover necessarily like define the relationship like what I believe and how that's been played into my marriage. But between home and acting last year, I think you're really good at kind of inviting these really uncomfortable sequences. Um, but I think it brings it forth because it brings in conversations of necessarily of like self-reflection. Um, and that's one of the things that I really respect about you as a filmmaker is that there is that self-reflection um thing. And like that's not always a thing with horror because you can definitely have horror that is just supposed to be slapsticky and like goofy and but between home and acting last year, like you're definitely challenging the viewers to kind of embark on this self-reflection journey. Is that something that just happens organically, or is that something that is intentional?
I think there has to be an intention towards it. Like, my favorite directors are people like David Cronenberg, David Lynch. And with Cronenberg in particular, when something like Videodrome, you watch it for the first time, all those ideas are stuck in your head for days and days afterwards. And I think truly disturbing material like that needs to kind of creep in because it's making you want to look at the bigger picture and ask some questions, but it's got to creep in, stay with you. I think there's a place for all types of horror. And we have been recently trying to experiment with different kinds of horror, mostly because of, in a truthfully honest way, sometimes you got to go, well, can we do full-on entertainment? Because we're going to need jobs. You know? But when
Yeah.
it's down to the things that you actually want to do, like Home Israel and acting, these kind of films allow you to have, that bigger conversation. There were just things that I really wanted people to be stuck with and to question. So with acting, one of the key elements with, just to discuss the nudity briefly, and that is, I didn't want to do the whole expectedness of seeing Bella being the sexual alert. Like, she doesn't get naked or anything like that, but I wanted her to have the control that she could do that with the prostitute character. Because if you look at those situations, and I love the film, don't get me wrong, it works perfectly for the scene, but American Psycho, where he's in control of the prostitution and he's dominating what he wants them to do because he knows he's going to kill him, and it's like playing with them. I wanted to do similar elements to that, and it kind of stays with you. The funny thing with also with working out set piece sequences for movies and stuff, you want to have those creep scares that do linger in. So when they're in the dark, they're thinking of them popping up. So it's trying to find an element to give those really groovy kind of set pieces. And in particular with Home Israel LA, we didn't have any crew. There was no crew. I had to shoot it. I directed it. And at some points I had to light it and do the sound. Sometimes Jackson had to light himself because of the COVID restrictions. There were 6 of us. So it was one of the most intense physical, trying to get all these set pieces to really deliver, but it allowed that challenge. So now it's finding that balance between having bigger discussions, creeping those really disturbing ideas. And I love disturbing cinema, but I don't believe shock is there for no reason. There has to be a reason behind these things. So if you find those reasons behind it and then deliver some cool scare set pieces, that's what I'm trying to get the right mix between. I'm not sure if that was answering the question directly, but
It did. Like it did. And I fully agree. Like I think you accomplished that in spades with this film. And I think it you guys can definitely tell that there's like an intimacy about it. And that's one of the things that, like you mentioned earlier, that I really liked about between this and acting is that there are definitely moments where you can feel that. And I really like that. So Home is Where I Lay is going to be playing on the big screen at the Alamo Draft House in Winchester, Virginia. It is going to be capping off our religious trauma block at 2:30 on April 15th. And if you guys can't, we'll have links in the descriptions below, but if you can't make it, it is now currently also streaming on VOD. And if you guys attend the festival and like the film, it is now also available on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what people think of it. I hope people enjoy it, if that's the right word.
Acting was one of the most talked about movies last year, so I'm curious to hear what people are going to say about Home.
That's amazing to hear, especially being all the way over here, but that's awesome.
So we are kicking off something special and new for the month of April this month, and we are going to be talking, we're going to be covering all of the Evil Dead movies. Andy, where are we starting?
We're gonna start right with the original, with Sam Raimi's 1981 Evil Dead.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
movie.
it's the one that started it all.
Yeah, this movie is we've recorded these backwards. We recorded Evil Dead 2 before this one.
Yeah.
Uh,
I tried to
uh,
keep I tried to keep it make sense chronologically, knowing that we were recording it out of order. So which
but
I think
yeah.
yeah.
So as an independent filmmaker, Sam, like what does something like The Evil Dead mean to you?
I mean, The Evil Dead's a masterpiece. It's a film that accomplishes everything with barely anything on a budget sense, but also like because of the impact of what it did in the UK and how extreme the whole video nasty stuff was with the response to Evil Dead. And a film that genuinely, the first time I watched it, I was terrified. It's horrifying. It's a horrible, horrible film in the best way possible. And I've got a lot of love for that kind of thing. He's working on every little thing he can. He's got great acting. It's got great set pieces. You've got great gore. You've got things that your mind had never really seen before until you see those moments. So yeah, I love Evil Dead. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I'm a real big fan of Evil Dead. One of the things I've always said about this whole series is that each entry, but this one kind of very specifically, is kind of just a playground for Sam Raimi and his crew to just try so many different things and mostly succeed at it. But and just in terms of the creativity and I've looked into the making of this film a bunch, listened to the commentaries, and it's remarkable just how much of it even was on the paper, but the what was on the paper, but not the how, and just the ingenuity of them. Like, we're gonna get out there, we're gonna figure out how to decapitate a body, and make it look really cool with little to no money. So it's so interesting to me, where I'm actually a little bit more of a fan of the horror comedy that this series ends up going towards, but I have tons of respect for this original one, and seeing it for the first time as a 14-year-old. I mean, this and Halloween and like Clerks were all just so formative in me seeing something that I thought I could also accomplish if I put my head to it, and not watching a movie that was so above me that I felt like I couldn't do that. So I love that they were just believable, that like friends could get together with tons of hard work and tons of ingenuity and pull something like this off. It's inspiring for filmmakers.
Definitely.
Yeah, I really love this film. I agree with Sam. I think it's a masterpiece, and it's a aspiring almost masterclass too of things that you can do on such a tiny budget. Like even 40 years later, I think that you can do so much if you just have the drive to do it. And you look at the set pieces, like Sam said, but also like the practical effects in this. I think here the practical effects, especially once you kind of have the evil kind of exposed to the friends, looked very like distinctive. Like it has like a very signature look that doesn't quite look like the zombie films of that era. It doesn't quite look like the possession films of that era. It's very thick, it's very gnarly, it's very gross, and it's simplistic. I think that especially with like to like compare it to like big budget like movies like either the MCU or like even like the Transformers films, like those are films that like are very like overcomplicated. Like to know what to the MCU in particular, like you have to know what happens in projects one, two, and three. The Transformers just really like overly complicated for no reason. I think the thing that I really love and admire most about this film is just how simple it is. Pacing is a little bit slow at times, but like it builds masterfully and it just keeps that simplicity.
See, one of the things I love about what Sam Raimi does so well is he kind of creates a language of how he wants his demon to be. His demons are maniacal and almost, to me, they make me think of like Haxan and in the way the dancing devil and that. It's always like a medieval pleasure in torture. And I think that's where the comedy lies so nicely with it. And Sam Raimi makes that choice quite earlier on. So they're menacing and scary, but they're still the same energy. And that energy doesn't like change for any of his demon stuff. Even like Drag Me to Hell has a similar sort of brings that energy that those Evil Dead creations have. And yeah, it makes it for a very simple story. But once you understand the language of the demons, and obviously he grows that through the franchise, it makes it a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. Having a firm understanding of what he wanted to accomplish. And like Josh, we were talking about too, just about the look. One thing that I never really thought about till watching it this time was I doubt this was the first one to kind of do this, but I really like that they didn't oversaturate the blood, which I find you find a lot in the 70s and early 80s, where they wanted to pop on screen so it doesn't look like blood. Especially if I'm thinking like Dawn of the Dead, it's almost got a pink hue to it. And this, they kept it real dark and just and because blood can almost look black when it's not lit properly. It looks very dark, and it added an element of just visual disgustingness that I feel like we now get a lot of. I mean, we're always going for a more realistic tone these days, but I think this was like one of the films that might have been a drawing point in just how we portray that kind of thing.
I guess like with the blood color and stuff, because by the end of the film, there's so many different colored oozes and stuff pouring out of
Of
their
course,
face.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's kind of nice that the blood isn't so distinctly, yeah, that bright blood that would take you out of that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels very grounded despite some of its more fantastical elements. And yeah, I definitely agree. Like I think one of the coolest like things that this film offers in terms of blood is in the some of the final sequences where they are kind of like showing blood pouring through like different aspects of the cabin, and you
Oh,
just
it's a
get that
light. The light socket is one of my favorites. It's
yeah,
just that visual alone for 3 seconds is like iconic.
the light socket reminds me of Halloween 2 where they have Michael's eyes start bleeding.
Bleeding from the eyes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but this like my one of my favorite things in particular is the blood filling up the light bulb. Like that to me, just from like a visual aesthetic, just looks gross and gnarly. And I feel like guess I didn't really realize it until this time, but it definitely has a lot of that like grime that Texas Chainsaw Massacre has to where like you almost kind of feel like you need a boost after watching this.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, you nailed it with that. In both movies, I picture myself being there, even just on set, let alone not even in the movie, just on set, and it's gross, like, and knowing the conditions of this movie too, it's like I respect what they made out of it too, but I also like, as a crew member myself, I'm just like, man, I would be bummed out. Like if I had to be in those woods every single day doing this with these guys in the 20-degree temperature.
There's definitely a vibe of a bit of Italian horror to it as well,
Yeah.
where we take one step too far with the Italian horror. And I think it benefits from that, from being, they said, the rural sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre sort of vibe, very American, and then mixing in with the extreme Italian horror and some more gothic aspects of Hammer. It kind of takes them a little bit everywhere and creates its own original like recipe, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And like I one of the books I read last year was actually Gunnar Hansen's Chainsaw Confidential, which talks about like the actual like behind the scenes and like the challenges of making um the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I highly recommend it if you can find a copy. I know it's out of print, but it's well worth the read and it's freaking fantastic. I believe it's on digital like platforms like Kindle and stuff like that. But Andy, I'm curious since you've actually like you listen to commentaries and like know a little bit more probably about this than myself. I can't speak for Sam, but what are some like the gnarliest facts that come out of like the production of
I mean,
this?
the thing that always fills me with dread is those contact lenses that they have to wear for the white eyes. Apparently, they were just thick ceramic beams, and anytime that their eyes are all white, the actor can't see a single thing. So whenever there's choreographed struggling or fighting or falling down steps, if they have the dead-eyed eyes in, they're completely blind and they hurt. And so uh it's just, yeah, things like that. And like just everybody got hurt. Like there was no stunt people at all. Everyone did their own stunts. They were all about 19 and 20 years old, so they had the gusto of some young filmmakers who were ready for anything. But they've all talked about it, like looking back, they're like, we wouldn't ever agree to do it. Like we all could have, even just as simple as falling into the cellar, the actress hit the back of her head and got a concussion. It's just it's funny because in hindsight, we can all like look at this and be like, oh my god, the passion that they put into it. But they've all kind of, not, I would never use the word regret, but they're all just like, this was a young person's game, basically making something this gnarly and to be this hungry to make a movie, which is why I respected it also.
I definitely think that's true when it comes to different energies when you first start up. There are some things that you do go, maybe I would have like, not pushed into 14, 15 hours that day when you're
Yeah.
older and you start maybe a bit more respect to people. Just we're all here trying to work together.
But by all accounts too, they all talk about it like a family though. I mean, I think it was like 9 people. They all slept in that cabin. They had the amenities that the characters had. So it was what it was.
I mean, especially like you obviously there had to have been something between Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi because I mean, they've worked together over 40 years on I think if I remember correctly, Campbell has been in almost every single project, at least a cameo capacity, much like the car that we see here in Evil Dead.
Yeah, I don't know if it's everyone, but I think the numbers are high. But I think they're
Yeah.
yeah, because actually I don't know, but I also haven't seen everything. Like we on the Evil Dead 2, we talk about some of his more mainstream stuff like Oz and the Great and Powerful. I don't know if he's in that, but it's technically a Sam Raimi movie.
Yeah, I don't
But
think he's
they're
in that.
yeah, but their relationship, yeah, goes back to high school. They knew each other, and kind of he was always the actor. Sam Raimi was the film nerd, and it was just a perfect, symbiotic relationship.
One of the things that I really like about this is like Sam talked about this earlier when we were talking about his film Home, is that like the they're very like subtle in how they set everything up. Like the first sequence of Scott walking up to the house to get the keys, like, and you just have that swing like banging up against continuously and just
Yeah,
kind of creating this like really eerie like sound, and it almost kind of gives the film this like atmospheric horror, but like also the way that they end up kind of just going about their vacation as normal, and then you finding the Necronomicon. I think this movie just like paces itself really well, even if it does drag in certain portions, that lays the foundation for the horror that happens in the final act of this movie really effectively.
Well, that's it. You want to believe in the characters, and I think like there is a quite a casual, relaxed dynamic between them all. Obviously, Ash isn't the make a joke every 2 seconds guy that he becomes, but in the beginning, he's just a guy trying to survive, and it's that type of horror of the ordinary person in extraordinary circumstances. And I think as an audience, we always can connect quite quickly to the person because they're reacting in this way where they're not immediately going into the hero role. Like he's pretty much a scream king throughout most of the first Evil Dead, being thrown
Yeah.
around left, right, and center. And it gives you the reward, obviously, in the later films where he becomes the bigger hero and it becomes more of a zany cartoon. But in that first film, yeah, you're more just literally just seeing him being thrown around and going through that. And I think Sam Raimi's very good at that with his protagonists of pushing them physically and mentally to a point where you just want to go, you can do it. And yeah, he
yeah,
succeeds.
yeah. I agree, and that's kind of why I like that we paired this with your film, "The Home Is Where I Lie," because it is, in some ways, a lot of it is just kind of a single person losing their mind in a cabin while losing everything around them. And apparently, too, in the original script, it was much longer, but obviously for budgetary reasons, they didn't go. But it did have more psychological elements, kind of going into Ash's psyche. But Sam Raimi himself said that he decided to pare it down and go a little bit more straightforward, just to make it a little more palatable for the time, or just I don't know, for selling it or commercial purposes. But it is interesting, but a lot of it's still in there. I mean, him having to cut up his girlfriend, it's not the hilarious joke it is in the second one. It's played very serious, and you're meant to see the psychological toll on this guy.
Yeah, one of the things that like I've seen this film a few times, and it wasn't until this one, but there's a scene, or probably within like the first 20 minutes of this movie, where Shelley is reading, and if you look at her hand, it actually is like discolored. Um, like similarly to how like she would be in the final act. So like there's a little bit of that like undeadness that's like slowly starting to creep in.
Yeah, those early moments when the evil's first revealing itself is the most effective for me in terms of scares. The uh the playing card scene I remember specifically. I was about 14 when I first saw this, and when she starts, you know, reading the playing cards without looking at them, and then turns around and you get our first real good look at Dead face. Yeah, that was I remember as a child. Even now, it still filled me with some creepiness, but those are my favorite moments. Kind of the swing outside, even her drawing the Necronomicon. Like once you realize her hand's not moving, it's not moving randomly. She's actually drawing something very crudely. It's all very creepy stuff.
I think that's one of the other things with the film is the film has a very good use of POV for evil instead of because there's always that lurking sense of dread everywhere. And then when you've got the camera flying around almost seamlessly, can go wherever it wants, and it's just watching, waiting, ready to launch. I think there's a sequence in towards before the woman gets the possession where the window's smashed through, and
Yep.
it's just lurking around and it's just waiting for that moment. You know it's going to hit her, but it's more from almost from the evil's perspective, narratively as well. Like it's just like, well, where are we going to start? Who's going to kick this off?
Yeah. And just to
Yeah,
keep praising the actual filmmaking aspects, like they knew that they wanted the POV evil from the script, but it wasn't until they got there that they realized they can put the camera on a 2x4 and have the producer and Sam Raimi each on an end and just running through the woods. And it's like as simple as that created one of the most like iconic visuals you've ever seen. So I gotta always just throw the praise whenever I can.
yeah, I think this movie, like I feel like as a horror fan and as a viewer, like I don't typically get scared very often. I will say like uncomfortable happens before scared. And this movie is one of the very few films that even watching it in hindsight is still very, very creepy and still effectively scary. The sequences where they actually have Linda laughing still like curdles my skin. It just gets under there and it's so freaking creepy. And the makeup and everything is incredibly effective. I would say more than any possession film I've ever seen.
It is pretty effective. I think yeah, it's weird because Sam Raimi plays so well with the Ghost Ride effect. I always think his films are like Ghost Rides, Ghost House experiences. And like personally, for me, the scariest film is The Exorcist. That film stays in your head and never wants to let go. But it's a much darker, brooding piece. Whereas, of course, Evil Dead wants you to go along for the ride and be at the point where you're holding back to look. But it doesn't want to lurk too much there. It wants you to have a fun time and almost let it go afterwards, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
you get that just from yeah, it's just a much more manic experience. And it just gets more and more manic as the franchise goes on. And it's one of the best franchises in horror for the fact that it keeps quite consistent. It doesn't
Yeah,
really dip.
yeah. We kind of speak about this in our next episode, but I think it's one of the best franchises because yes, it stays consistent but always fresh at the same time. Like even the first three movies, like they're completely different experiences and borderline different genres every time. And that's up to including the remake, which we'll talk about in the future. But it's a way it flows, but it allows for creativity every time, but without losing like the essence, if that makes sense, of just like what the series is supposed to feel like. The groundwork laid in this first one.
I think that's exactly what Sam Raimi tries to achieve with the Evil Dead franchise, and why he keeps it going is that there is like a big old playground of creativity that he can just throw someone in and go, right, you know the rules, do what the hell you want. And seeing as he chose Fidel Alvarez for the Evil Dead remake and then Lee Cronin for Evil Dead Rises, you just get this impression he just wants to see what they can do in the most fucked up, entertaining way that might make some money.
Yeah, and I respect him too for allowing them to kind of even go back to the original because by the time that remake came out, Evil Dead was very much known for being a campy slapstick series. And by kind of respecting the original, I feel like it kind of brought all the fans back together because I know some people were kind of turned off on it when it first came out, but I think it's the reputation has grown a lot in the 10 years since its release.
Yeah, I and when we get there, I'll
Yeah, I'm jumping the
share my
gun.
feelings on it.
All right,
Um,
cool.
but I think this movie, like too, is like when you look at the sequel, and we'll talk about this, it's mostly like Ash. Like you have like side characters that come in for the second film, and even with Army of Darkness, you're mostly following um Ash throughout the course of this. But with this film in particular, you're seeing the dynamics of this group of friends that are kind of taking the a more effective like Friday the 13th 1980 like approach to this storytelling and bringing it in to the point where like I think that this film really opens up uh conversations about like the mental health aspects of this movie, whereas it's a little bit harder to kind of pull from like Evil Dead 2 or like Army of Darkness and even what I've seen of Ash versus Evil Dead, but I think here there are definitely like great things put into place where you kind of get to see um also too like there's a particular scene where like Scott is like really laying on the horror to like one of his friends and like doesn't really know when to stop. And for me, like watching this, I am always looking at like how can the conversation of mental health be involved with the film that we're talking about. And this one, I think that scene in particular is such a great uh beautiful look at like understanding the importance of your friends like mental health, like what how far is too far for someone in your friend group, and also being open enough to actually define the limits within the confounds of your relationship when it comes to mental health for you and the other person.
I think like the reactionary response is interesting with in a mental health sense of you're in a situation where something bad is happening, and then of course that's when we mentally unravel. And when you've got that like bottle effect of everyone being in a cabin, you're gonna start getting, you know, cabin fever, people losing their minds in that respect. And I think Evil Dead does an interesting way of that, where and I'd argue in Evil Dead 2, it still does that, especially in the scene with where everything comes alive around him. It's trying to push how far to make him go insane, to make him just be, well, vulnerable so they can, you know, possess him. And I think that's an interesting idea of how far can you push someone to insanity to take them over completely and be your own device in some ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and by making Ash kind of similar how you coined him like the final, you say the final king of the film. It's interesting too because he kind of does start as a very not even a reactionary character. He almost kind of hides, and Scott is kind of the alpha male of the situation as you would traditionally see. But it's kind of by not being the one by being the last to be possessed or really never being possessed in this movie, Ash kind of shows that he does have like kind of the strength of character and the strength of mind at least to not get broken by this evil. So yeah, it is very interesting to see that while he's not on the outside the tough bravado, he actually ends up being the strongest just by having the strongest psyche.
Sambra brought up a really interesting point where you're kind of seeing this reactionary thing that like takes effect. And I think that that's oftentimes how in modern relationships, maybe you guys have different ones, different types of relationships, but I definitely feel like uh, sometimes that in the past with me, like I've definitely been reactionary to like my mental health like is affected instead of like being like, hey, like let me draw the lines and say like this is what I can handle, this is what I can't. Like when I first started getting into the horror genre, I think Andy, maybe you even have had conversations similar with Masha, is like one of my things that like one of the earliest conversations is like my wife was like, this is what I can do in horror, this is what I can't. Like, and understanding and like having those lines that way you understand the mental health limits of the people that you value and that you carry. And that way they're not reactionary. And I think in this case, because you do have that cabin fever aspect to the storytelling, and also is the 80s. So like the 80s, we didn't really talk about mental health. The way that we do now is like that's why you see the reactionary. So that it almost kind of feels like the way that Ash is kind of like reacting feels almost like a cautionary tale for us as the viewer.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think it's an interesting thing of reactionary stuff because it, like, when you look at COVID, yeah, when COVID occurred, we all had a reaction. We all had a joint sense of shock, and some reacted by going, "Oh God," and fall into depression. Some go, "Oh, this is not real, and we need to look at this," and it's all this psychosis. And when you put that into like a cabin fever scenario, back to the Evil Dead, you get like the Evil Dead 2 does it actually, where like some people don't believe it's real. Or they think it must be the guy who psychotically killed the people, and they couldn't be convinced that maybe something more bigger and evil is happening at the same time. And I think reactionary situations force us to kind of be stuck in that moment where you're not thinking necessarily logically, you're just going with the emotion that runs with you. And horror has this beautiful job where it's designed to do that. Its whole game is not to have a calm discussion with you, is to go, how far can we heighten this to scare you or to disturb you or to give you some entertainment or whatever, you know, like, so those mechanisms, they need to be there. You need that sense of that reactionary trauma. I think it works so well in horror. Just a random film to say, but the thing does the same thing, where they're all stuck in the cabin sort of fever, and then they start unraveling mentally. It's just in very different ways, because again, proven from COVID, we all react in very different ways, and individually might go through the same thing, but our psychosis will push us in some very strange places. And yeah, Evil Dead does that very nicely, where the evil tries to convince them that they're the innocents, and they always go, like, oh, it's just me, why are you doing this to me? And it would completely twist your brain to see that different side, and it takes a lot of strength to go, no, this is not real, this is something evil that's trying to connect with me. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting way they do that.
And like you talked about, like, specifically, like, I think that while I do think that, like, it's important to define mental health limits in relationships, specifically with this one, and like talking about like the importance of like also reactionary. That's why when you read studies about like mental health benefits specifically for horror, you get what, I don't remember the technical term, but it's like it's allowing you to have this like contained experience where you get to face your fears. And you know, there have been proven health benefits for it. And I think it's called the exposure theory, to where you're allowing yourself to be opened up to, and experiencing the reactionary uh, feeling in that moment. And I feel like I feel like both are important, um, to say the least, because you do need to strengthen your mental health, because also, like, how are you going to know like what your limits on mental health are if you're not exposing yourself to the stuff?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I just thought of this because I never really thought. I'll be honest, I never really applied a mental health angle to Evil Dead. I've watched it more just a little more surface level, but it is kind of interesting on a very like surface level for the script. It's Ash is the one who kind of has this really good relationship with his girlfriend Linda. He buys her this necklace. It kind of shows that he is a very open person who's open to those kind of relationships. And then it is that necklace that physically saves him at the end and uses it to burn up the book. So you really could. I think they are probably saying something there where, by being the most connected with just humanity, he's able to stand up against that evil.
And it's also really interesting they bring up the necklace, because also the fact that it's a magnifying glass
Yeah.
essentially. And it's really interesting because you're like using that as a almost kind of like a metaphor for like looking into the healthiness of this couple at the center of it. I think that's by seeing how healthy of a couple they really are, and like how good of a boyfriend he is, it really does make Linda's like ultimate fate in this movie that much more like hard to experience, to where like when you are seeing him go outside to ultimately kill her in this movie, to kind of like dismember her, and you do have that emotional like ties to her, because of how the film has kind of showcased this really healthy relationship.
Mm.
Definitely. Just that necklace always makes me laugh, mainly because listening to the commentaries. But the reason it's a magnifying glass is originally there was going to be a scene where some light comes, the sun kind of comes through and gets magnified and helps burn the book, and that shows Ash that he could burn the book. They ended up not having a practical way to do it that looked good, so they just scrapped it. But they make fun of themselves constantly on both commentaries for both movies about how ugly this necklace looks, and that like no girlfriend would ever receive that and be like, it's beautiful, I'll never take it off. And they always just make fun of themselves for just having this most unbelievable piece of jewelry be this like symbol of hope, and it's just this ugly little magnifying glass that it just always makes me giggle.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've never seen a necklace or any piece of jewelry quite like that. So every time I'm like, I watch this movie, I'm always kind of like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
But I
but
think
by
it's
only
funny.
it's meant to just be something beautiful, but they really had that gag in mind. So, and they had no money, so they just picked up something they could buy at the local store. Everything. That's again what I love about this movie is the on the flyness, because for no how much it didn't really tie too much to what you were saying earlier, Josh, about kind of comparing this to more planned things like an MCU or a Transformers. it's what makes these special effects just so much more fun to watch for me is the amount of creativity it allows for. Unlike these modern movies where everything has to be predetermined for a team of computer programmers later, on set you don't really have that much freedom because they've already kind of pre-drew these out and you have to kind of stay in those confines. These guys showed up with just all this a toolbox of fun and just were like, how are we going to figure this out? Like, what can we draw? Like, and they talk about the community aspects where everybody on this film wore 700 hats, kind of like hey, you were saying with Home Is Where I Lie, where when the actors weren't shooting, he said they were in the other room helping props make the next fake head, and when Sam Raimi wasn't doing, so everybody did everything, and it's like I said, for me, it's like a playground. It's just it allows for so much creativity and on the fly just doing. And their sense of humor about it is also great. Like these guys are very funny guys, and like they can laugh at mistakes. They understand that this is fun. It's why continuity doesn't matter in this series. It's all just like each kind of film is just like this is what we want to make right now, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm 100% here for that. And I guess like from like a filmmaking standpoint, Sam, like hearing kind of almost like having that similarities between like the production side of filmmaking. Does it allow you to be more creative as a filmmaker or like be challenged as an artist?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always encouraging to hear the greats going through similar situations because like it is a tough thing to do. In a lot of cases, special effects, for example, are magic tricks. You just got to show them where, there's show without the strings or reveal the little tricks in there. And but I love Werner Herzog, and Herzog always had a struggle in his sets. And I think, I mean, you don't have to go to the extremity of a Herzog set, but just to know that this is not supposed to be an easy process. This is work at the end of the day. This is work that everyone is coming in. You're hoping at 110% to put something great together. So yeah, you're going to find moments where everyone jumps in, and I'm quite fortunate. I have a lovely little community around me of actors who do jump in all the time. And I've had one of my actresses recently. She made me some like monster tentacles, and we've had her design some witchy stuff. And it's just because of her love for craft. They were like, "Hey, do you want to just try and work on some of this stuff?" And again, like I said, Bella with the storytelling. Filmmaking is the ultimate teamwork when it comes to creativity because there are so many people to make it work. And even though, yes, there's those skeletal opportunities, that skeletal crew should be completely connected and understanding in respect to what they're doing. And I think things like Evil Dead only encourage you. Like I love those stories where you know how much of a struggle every moment was because it's on the camera. You can see that there's so much being thrown at you. So yeah, I think it's very important for filmmakers to learn about these sort of films and go, oh shit, yeah, we're all in this together. This is always going to be a struggle, but that's right.
I feel like you only hear stories like that on like smaller films and Puppy. And that's one of the things that because back where I used to live, there's a really like tight knit group of filmmakers where you had people that wore different hats. Um, I know that like when I was doing theater that I helped out I was in front, but I was also like helping like building sets and like painting and just because like I passionately love the craft of filmmaking and stuff like that to where like definitely sounds like it, it's really a healthy environment, but I also imagine that like it does take quite a few projects and probably a couple of years to actually build up a community like what you're talking about.
Almost definitely. And I think building a community is a very important thing. You have different sizes of community. You have your localized
Mhm.
community, then you have your more, in the respect to the UK, because obviously it's a lot smaller in the USA, you have a nationalized community, a community where I can go and work with someone who maybe lives like 3 hours away, they can come down to Portsmouth and do a bit of filming, and we can share those things through film festivals. So there is that beauty of that community, and it's so it does take time because you're right. The first couple of films, you're trying to find your own creative feet of who you are. And then after that, you got to find those collaborators where you're both pushing your careers together, where it gels well and it actually works. And it took time for what I've been doing, but I try to keep working constantly to meet those different people and to try and develop different projects with especially actors where it's not just repeating the same thing. You want to be able to give the actor as much as you can, and you want them to be able to give it by exploring new characters themselves. So I think that can only come with having a community who want more opportunities. And if it works on one film, you get to move forward and do more in that respect.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's one of the. Go ahead, Andy.
I don't know. You after you.
I was gonna say that's one of the reasons that I've loved being able to podcast and do a film festival is because I love the ability to kind of make relationships with people, yes, professionally, but also kind of get to see their craft grow. I was really excited when I got the notification that Home is Where I Lay had actually been submitted to our festival, and saw that it was you, saw that Annabelle was involved. And I've seen her do a couple other films. Like we covered Eating Miss Campbell last year. It's a great movie. Um, but yeah, I love to be able to see how communities like yours like are developing over time, and kind of being able to be a fly on the wall for that. It's something that as a programmer is like really special to me, and especially as someone that is a true fan of the craft of not only filmmaking but the genre of horror.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think we're lucky to be in a time where social media and things like that, sure, they got their negatives, but most filmmakers are open to talking about who they are as a creator and wanting to be seen and shown to different people. So I think we are lucky to get at least a little peek into different communities in that respect. I have found that by being more vocal about what I'd like to see in the indie community or reaching out to others and not feeling that fear, you get quite a big response to it. And yeah, we've had a lot of filmmakers who I've met at film festivals. We start talking about some ideas. They come down to Portsmouth. We arrange locations or whatever they need for the shoot. We help them shoot that. And then, yeah, we could do a vice versa thing where we'll get them involved for doing sound and they'll come and crew for us. Because that's the only way communities can work is to help all of the filmmakers around you thrive. It's just limiting limitations in regards to if someone wants to do a massive car chase film, you got to be practical, you know. But if you can give someone where they can focus in their skills and spend time with actors and just work with good crew on again something like a chamber piece, I think you can achieve a lot. And I think that's a good way to be able to connect with people is by going for smaller projects that can still be, you know, little micro budget features, but to not run with the dream straight away. You're trying to learn new crafts, so work with others who can support that. And how much we can offer that support is it's a good feeling to know that you've made a film with someone that was their idea and you gave them everything you could and it worked. And we recently had a film called Deadly Display, which again stars Bella. And it's a chamber piece kind of psychodrama in a music venue. And it works so nicely. I'm so glad that because we had a few setbacks on when we were going to shoot it, that the director SN Sibley finally got to make the film we wanted to make, and we were happy to be able to sort out that location and provide those things because that's what a community should do.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I love how it extends to like filmmaking all over. Like Josh, you're talking about how in the podcasting world it's very similar. I'm a crew member myself. I don't work too much with an independent film, but I have, you know, I do sound. I have some documentary clients, and then I do some corporate videos, some entertainment stuff. But even in that world where it's not so much artistic, it's a little more just practical video that we're making. The watching like my clients slowly kind of figure out who they like working with, and then kind of hiring the same people all the time. So now when I go to these clients, I know my DP, I know the gaffer who's going to be on it, and even though we're working on just like I said, just very boilerplate kind of things that are just kind of going to go up on the internet, it's still that community vibe where it's like I get excited to see these people and I go like, oh, I can't wait to see how Michael shoots this today, and you know, and I'll be putting the sound. So it's crazy. I love how it just extends to so many aspects from the independent cinema world, so podcasting about and critics to even just making some corporate video or some EPK footage and things like that. So I totally agree. And just to tie it back to Evil Dead, I mean, it's what inspired me. It's one of the probably 5 films that I watched growing up where I was like, holy crap, I might be able to do this in some way. And so yeah, it's great. It was a great reminder too, because I hadn't watched this in a while, so it was great to rewatch this. Just sometimes you've seen something so many times you forget to watch it again. It's been 7 years. Maybe you'll see it with a new eye, and it was really cool to do that.
Yeah, and I think it underlines the importance of community, tying it back into mental health as well, is because you are building relationships, but also at the same time, you're doing life with people. If you're like repeating things, like there's like vulnerability things that are going to happen. Before Andy stepped in to take over co-hosting duties, Mark and I have been podcasting probably for like off and on for about 4 or 5 years. And that relationship I feel like has like really surprised me because we met talking about a Zac Efron movie of all things. And uh that has kind of grown, and like we've had some like really vulnerable conversations. I have the gentleman Anthony that I do the Friday the 13th episodes with, like me and his co-hosting, as well as him like from the Retro Gamers, have like also been through a lot of those things. And um they are, I feel like I'm excited to work with those people again, but I'm also just like I've reached a point to where it's like I don't want to just professionally like work with those people. Like I like checking in and saying like, "Hey man, how you doing? How's life? How's the wife? How's the kids?" Um, because I think there is a turning point in the relationship where it's no longer just professional, but it becomes like an actual like long lasting relationship that will be a benefit for your mental health.
No, I definitely agree. It's always good to. I like to the people I work with. I do want to be able to speak to them on a friendly level. It's just nicer.
Yeah.
You get better, you just get better work, and you get the encouragement to support and push each other. And then they go, "Oh, I've always wanted to play this character," and you go, "Oh, cool! Now I'm creatively charged to write something for you." And it's just the best feeling, rather than all being corporate and being seen as we're all part of, it's just a system. Let's just get the job done, because then it just
Yeah.
doesn't feel like what's the point.
Yeah. Well, unless you gents have anything else you would like to talk about, I think we've really talked about this a lot. No, there's one more thing. I stand corrected. We talked about
Ooh.
this in the Evil Dead 2 episode, to like Wes Craven's tie, specifically Freddy Krueger's tie to the Evil Dead. And I'm curious if like you thought this, like Andy, like with that knowledge in mind. But
Uh-huh.
you mentioned this in the next episode that there's a Hills Have Eyes poster in here,
Yeah, in this movie.
famously written, directed by Wes Craven. There's a scene where Scott does the, and I don't know if like either one of you got this, but like that reminded me of uh Glenn's scene from Nightmare 1. And so I always thought like watching this, that is that like an homage to uh to Sam?
Ooh. That I haven't caught. It definitely well could be. I mean, these guys love throwing little Easter eggs for each other, just as friends, which I would totally do too if I was in their shoes. It still sounds like a fun little way to get a nod from your buddy. But I'd have to rewatch it. It's been a little while, so I'm not being able to connect the visual dots in my head.
I want to see now if I could just like find that isolated scene just to like send it over to you. Just be like, what do you think?
Yeah, it very well could be.
Well, I think on that though, that's gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. You guys can check out Sam's movie Home is Where I Lay when it hits the big screen on our religious trauma block April 15th at 2:30. You guys can have buy tickets. Links are going to be in the descriptions. Thanks to our um, festival sponsors this year, Convicted Printing, Diabolical DVD, Fierce Literature, Horror Pack, and you have to watch this podcast. So make sure that you guys check them out. But Sam, where can people find you online?
You can check me out on most of the basic social medias, but like Twitter, Sam Mason Bell or Trash Outs Film, Facebook, Trash Outs UK. I think it's Sam Mason Bell there, but mostly Twitter. Twitter seems to be the place that I enjoy the most when it comes to social medias. I can't be asked for Instagram taking photos every 2 seconds, but Twitter, yeah, go Twitter.
All right. And Andy, where can we find you?
You can find me at my other podcast, Love What I Love, and that's at LWIL Podcast. That is, you can guys Facebook, Instagram, and the occasional TikTok. We don't make them that often, but sometimes we get inspired.
Well, you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. It's and I also occasionally make TikToks at Gent Ghostface Gent. You guys can find Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcasts from. There's more great episodes like this. Make sure that you guys hit that subscribe because we're gonna be talking about Evil Dead throughout the entire month of April, up leading all the way up to the brand new movie Evil Dead Rise. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and of course, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes into you.